It's time for the Rose Chat Podcast, a podcast dedicated to celebrating the world's most beloved flower, the rose. Join award-winning gardeners Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington as they chat with rose lovers and experts from around the globe. With each episode, you'll gain valuable knowledge and insights to achieve the rose garden you've always dreamed of. Listen now as we explore the world of roses.
Try Haven brand soil conditioners, providing generations of gardeners with a truly all-natural alternative to chemical fertilizers with their line of composted manure and alfalfa teas. Easy to brew and use on all indoor and outdoor plants. Find them online at manuretea.com.
Hey friends, if you listened to the recent podcast with Matt Douglas from High Country Roses on preserving the classics, you'll remember his mentioning Carol Macon. Well, Carol's with us today. And just as Matt told us, she has an incredible garden, a garden that is home to about 400 roses, give or take. Carol has been sending me pictures of her garden, and I can tell you it is picturesque. There's gates and walls and arbors that display this beautiful collection, not to mention the location, but we'll get into all that later. I'm super excited to chat with Carol about roses. I want to hear all about her garden. I want to hear about the project with Matt, and I bet you do too. So let's get started. Hey, Carol, welcome to Rose Chat.
Thank you, Teresa. It's good to be here.
Well, Matt just whetted our appetite for your garden, and when he was talking about not only is Carol such an advocate for the rose, but her garden. You know, now that I've seen pictures, it really is a work of art. But before we get to talking about your garden, let's just back up a bit and tell us how you became interested in growing roses.
Well, it's actually goes all the way back to my grandmother, and this is true of a lot of rosarians. I think there was somebody in their life that got them going, and with Grandma, she didn't do it overtly. There was at their house an arbor on the east side of the house in South Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it had a pink rose growing up and over it. And I've done some digging around, and I've discovered that pink rose was probably New Dawn, plant patent number 1. Mm-hmm. And because of the timing, this would have been in the early 1940s. And I was a small child, and I was really impressed by those flowers. So much so that when I wandered around the neighborhood to see friends, I was able to identify plants that looked quite similar but were other colors. And I found a white rose in the neighborhood and a very small red one. And I thought, well, when I grow up, I'm going to have a pink one, a red one, and a white one. and by golly, I do.
I bet you do. I bet you do.
I know. But that's more or less how it started. That one rose made a big impression. Grandma had quite a garden, but she only had one rose. And that rose rebloomed. And the fact that of the timing and the fact that New Dawn was introduced in 1930, I believe, leads me to believe that repeating pink rose was probably New Dawn.
I have 2 of them in my garden. Wouldn't be without it. It's so beautiful. I don't get the rebloom that maybe you do here in the Midwest, but I get some. And every one that you get beyond the first beautiful flush is always a treat. But that first flush of bloom, that delicate pink, there's just nothing like that rose.
Right. I don't like to be without it.
So, tell us about those roses that you added to your garden.
Oh, the red one and the white one?
Yeah.
Boy, that's a long time ago, Teresa. And I obviously, I remember them being one-time bloomers. So these would have been old garden roses, which of course planted the seed. Yes. And then, years later, I decided, when Jerry and I married, we decided we would put in a rose garden. And as a matter of fact, his engagement present to me was 10 roses.
Oh.
And of all kinds. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. We just bought roses and planted them where we were going to live in this new house, which Jerry owned. And the next year, after we had married, several of them had died. And this went on for maybe 3 or 4 years until I met a woman called Jean Cartwright. And Jean Cartwright's brother was Dr. William Campbell, who owned a rosarium in Denver.
Oh.
And that rosarium, it was actually called High Country Rosarian, was in the grounds of his office. He was a doctor. He had an office there in Denver, and he sold roses from the office. And Jean took me up there, and this is where I found roses that would not die during the winter.
Mm-hmm.
He was an old rose expert. He grew several varieties, I think more than several. I mean, I think our initial purchase was maybe a dozen of these old garden roses, and they were wonderful. He had one that was a found rose called Champagne Arches, and I believe you can still get it. I'm not sure that Matt sells it under the name Champagne Arches, but we still have that one. We have Darla's Enigma. We have Felicite Parmentier. We have Celsiana, Cameo. All these roses that he was growing that never made it into downtown Denver and the normal nursery culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a real revelation when spring came and they were still alive. And I was a convert.
Well, that speaks to right rose, right place. We hear that all the time, location, location, location. And it's true. There are regional roses. Very true.
Very true. And so the collection that started with Dr. Bill's downtown office exploded. I sort of describe it as a hobby that ran amok. You know, it's just, well, I'm sure you've done the same thing, you know, just too many roses, and now what do I do?
Well, tell our listeners where you're from, where you're growing, and some of the challenges you face there with roses.
Okay, we grow roses at an altitude of 6,100 feet. We are on the alluvial fan of Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs, and Cheyenne Mountain is granite. Our soil is decomposed granite. We have a lot of clay. Now, that is not an entirely bad thing because our clay soil, when amended, is really good for roses. They love it. And of course, we did a lot of amending. Our neighbors, when we put in the rose bed, our neighbors thought we were digging a swimming pool. It was the length of our house, and we dug it out to a depth of 3 feet. There was a reason for that, and that is drainage. The property had some springs on it, seasonal springs. We're in a drought now, and I wish we had those springs, but we don't.
Yeah.
And so that it was 3 feet deep and highly amended. We put in half of the original soil, and then we added a lot of Canadian peat and some manure into that and planted the following spring. And that has been the general recipe for soil here, although after those 2 big beds that we put in, everything else I kind of had to double dig myself because I think Jerry decided he was done.
Well, that does happen.
Yeah, there you are. So here we are on the side of Cheyenne Mountain, and our basic problem here is Mother Nature, and that's a pretty basic problem. I mean, we have very strong winds in the spring, early spring, called Chinooks, and the winds can get up to 70, 80 miles an hour, even more. The canes whip around if you don't tie them down. We have huge temperature swings, and when I say huge, it's 70, 80 degree temperature swings. And this will kill a lot of plants. In 2014, we had a situation where not only was our garden hit that way, we lost trees, but Denver Botanic Gardens lost quite a few things that were real treasures. And it's, you know, we have to be prepared for this, but you can prepare yourself mentally for what happens to your garden, but the poor roses.
Yeah.
So I sort of decided that we had to grow things that could take Mother Nature in stride. And if they couldn't, well, there's always tomorrow we could plant something else. But it's been a real education. And I will tell you right now that you can count me among the climate change believers, because I have lived here and gardened here for a very long time. And I could tell you it's nowhere to what it was 20, 30 years ago. I mean, it's the extremes are happening and I'm not happy with it, but I'm just one person that's not happy with it. So I just have to learn to live with it.
Well, we're all adapting, aren't we? In so many ways. Now, if I recall, Matt mentioned bears. Is that true that you might have a bear or two around there?
Oh my goodness, do we have bears? You don't want to go out in our backyard today.
No kidding.
We have crabapple trees. This was a big mistake, Teresa. A big mistake. What did we know? All I knew is that I like crabapple jelly, and we put in 2 Dolgo crabapple trees that have the sweetest little crab apples, and they make wonderful jelly. Unfortunately, as we found out, the bears love them. The bears will come and they will climb up into the crabapple trees, and they break branches, and they eat and they eat and they eat. And then they leave for the evening, but they leave their refuse behind. And so the lawns out there look like we've had bears, and we have had bears. The nice thing is that they seem to come at night when we're in the house. So that's one good thing.
Well, another good thing is you've certainly changed my perspective on my Japanese beetle problem.
Well, they don't bother, bears don't bother the roses. Or,
they don't.
They will if they eat the apples that fall on the ground get fermented. And if they eat those, they will tear up your fence. And we've had fence repairs over the years, but for the most part, they don't bother the roses, and that's a very good thing. I would not want Japanese beetles at all.
Oh, they do steal a good bit of our beauty in the summer, and it's just a constant battle with them. Some years are worse than others. This year was a medium year for me, but it was a horrible year for others in my area. So, but I won't change. I won't switch them for bears though.
Oh, you don't want bears.
No, we certainly don't.
You have to kind of, when you go out in the morning, early morning, you kind of have to look around and make sure you're alone in the yard. And we have nooks and crannies, so there you are. You have to just be aware that they're there and to be careful.
Well, tell us about some of the other roses in your collection.
You mean types of roses?
Just roses that have emerged to be your favorites.
Oh, my favorites. Well, I will tell you right now that there's nothing that I would, if I had just a garden that I could say, hey, have half a dozen roses, I would have Canadians. And the reason is those Canadians, I was talking about roses that can take Mother Nature. They can take Mother Nature. Mm-hmm. And these are, I believe, they're classified as classic shrubs by the American Rose Society, but in Colorado, and I'm sure in the rest of the United States, they grow as climbers. And not only climbers, but the hardy climbers. You can leave them on those arches and pillars, and you don't have to worry about winter protection. And for a gardener, who has a lot to do during the year anyway, it's wonderful to have carefree roses. I think these Canadian shrubs come as close to carefree as roses can be. And I'm talking here about John Cabot, John Davis, Henry Kelsey. They're just wonderful. And I use them as climbers. I recommend them to other people. I wish that commercial nurseries in Colorado would carry them, but for the most part, they don't. And it's a great pity.
There's just so many roses out there, and we're finding fewer places where we can get them. I'm asked all the time, where can I get this rose or that rose? And it's becoming difficult. New varieties are just easier to find, and there's some great ones, but we don't want to forget about those others either.
That is one of my big problems with the rose industry, I'm afraid, is that there's such a push every year with the new introductions, and rightly so. This is how they earn their keep, but still, not every rose is developed for every climate. And I think that with a little more education on the part of our American Rose Society, some of our nurseries would get more climate specific with their offerings. And I think that's more or less what Matt's trying to do. I mean, he's doing it. He's living it.
Yes.
So it's wonderful what he's trying to accomplish, and I'm going to help in any way possible.
So what are some roses that are on the top of your list that you're going to get to Matt so he can start propagating? And,
I had to twist his arm for a number of them. you need this rose, Matt. You need to be growing this rose. Well, the most problematic one for Matt was a rose called Black Ice. He didn't want it, and he took it reluctantly. Okay. And it's a red floribunda, and Black Ice is a child of iceberg, and it's crossed with, and I'm sorry, but the cross is not in my head right now, but it is crossed with a very prominent red floribunda that Matt decided was not on his good list. Oh. And so I told him, I said, this is the best red floribunda I have ever grown, and I've grown quite a few. And it should be in gardens all over the Front Range because of its hardiness, its beauty, the fact that it can take anything. And he looked at it, and it was in the middle of black spot season, and it had no leaves. And Matt looks at this and said, I don't think I want that. So it's kind of like, I have to twist your arm. The black spot's not going to kill it. It's going to bounce right back. And of course it did. And it's in its third flush out there looking gorgeous. And you'd never know it had black spot months before. But that was one that I thought he should have. And that is totally based on beauty, climate, reliability, lack of care. I don't spray my garden. I've never wanted to get involved with a chemical thing to the point where, it would obliterate my appreciation for the beauty. And so I don't spray. And if I get black spot, I get black spot. It doesn't bother me. We don't have it to the extent that the southern states do. Or more humid places do. We live in a dry climate, so it's not a very big deal. It's just ugly, and some people wouldn't want it. But I have tried. I'll be honest. I've tried many roses because they're supposed to be disease resistant, or even disease free. I'm thinking particularly now with the Cordis roses, and they do a great job with releasing roses that don't need much care. And my only quibble with the Cordis roses, generally speaking, is that the bloom is not prolific. These roses bloom, they're beautiful. They're wonderful to have in the garden. I don't have to worry about them. They're most hardy for the most part. But they could bloom a little more, and I'm sure Cordis is working on that. So we just have these trade-offs. We have to live with them. And when we find wonderful roses like the Black Ice that will bounce right back, why not use them? But whether or not Matt winds up putting it on sale is another thing. Another one that I thought he should have, and that is a modern shrub, was Jacqueline Dupre, because Jacqueline is hard to find. And
It's gorgeous. I am familiar with that one. And oh my
yeah.
goodness, when the bloom is right, it is just spectacular.
Mm-hmm. It is wonderful. And so I made sure he got that. I wanted him to take Dancing in the Wind, which is a hybrid musk. And he got that one. When plants, he was here when some of them were not in bloom. And so you just have to describe, this is what this is going to look like, when it blooms. So we wanted to do that one. You talked with Matt about Madame Legrand de Saint Germain.
Yes.
Probably one of my favorite old garden roses. And Matt took that. He did get the Ramblers, and I think he mentioned both Eichenblau and Violette, and both of those are heavy bloomers for about a month at a time. Wonderful roses to have. Again, these are not small garden roses. If you have a small apartment garden, for instance, of Eichenblau is going to fill it. So
absolutely. There goes. I think we're now on year 4, and I bought Ghislaine de Felagon and Welschenblau from Matt, and they came as tiny little plants. They didn't stay tiny long. Welschenblau now is scaling a tree and a fence, and Ghislaine has covered pretty much most of my potting shed. It is absolutely beautiful, totally healthy. And we do get black spot here. We're very humid in the summer, but it is absolutely beautiful. And it gives a few blooms throughout the summer. But, starting the end of May for 4 or 5 weeks, it's just amazing.
Yes. And that is another one that I'm on my second Ghislaine because it's not entirely hardy here. It has to be up against your house, and it has to be out of the wind. Well, we always have our north winds that just don't seem to stop. And but when you give it what it wants, it's fine. It's great. Mine is not covering my house or a shed or anything else, but it's alive.
Well, there you go.
So it's good.
It's such a good color. It's just that yellow, peachy. It's just beautiful. Just beautiful.
I think another problem with sales as far as the old garden roses are concerned is that some people just don't want to get their tongues around these foreign names. So
well,
I often think that I don't know if you're familiar with Ilse Krone Superior. Ilse Krone Superior is a Cordis climber, an old one. And Ilse Krone, what a name. I mean, Ilse Krone Superior. And I once mentioned to Matt that if they had named that rose Ivory Elegance, they would have sold 1 million of them. But who wants to buy something called Ilse Krone Superior? So there you are. Marketing is an art unto itself.
Yes, and is it Otto Garden Director or there's
Garden Director Otto Lind? Yes.
That's another one. You think, okay, that does not sound pretty, but it is pretty, but it just doesn't sound pretty.
Right. But its garden rating is 8.7, and you can't quibble with that. So
no, you cannot. It is
but I'm sure it doesn't wind up in nurseries, for sale because of the name.
Well, I love what you're doing with Matt, and we need to get him over there this spring when things are just taken off. But I think that, just from a local level, just partnering with nurseries and beginning to tell them the stories. I have nursery friends here, and they'll contact me and say, here's what I'm thinking about. What do you think I should grow? I should sell. And that doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally I get to I'm invited into that conversation. And there's just things that we know that we need to put ourselves out there, I think, a little bit more and just be willing to re-educate. And because my garden would not be the garden that it is today without the history that's out there. Sometimes I grow the roses for the story and where they've been before. Just in a garden setting, I love walking around and just having these stories as a part of that garden experience. So it's a big part for me. But I think that those stories actually speak to others as well, and even to those who are, the bottom line is going to be sales. But I think there are some things that we can do to begin to re-educate just from a local at the local level.
Mm-hmm. I agree totally.
Well, just the pictures of your garden, and when you tell me that you don't have to spray for black spot, I'm so glad black spot is not just an awful thing for you, because your garden is just beautiful. And one of the things that I noticed on your Facebook page is that you're also a rose exhibitor. So tell our listeners about exhibiting roses and what that's been for you.
Well, it wasn't something that how do I want to put this, that I initially went into growing roses to do. We had a very small rose society here. We still do. The Pikes Peak Rose Society is quite small. And at one point we decided to have a rose show so that we could reach out to other potential members. And at this point, we had formed the Pikes Peak Rose Society out of a previous Rose Society that was not affiliated with the ARS. And it took, where did we put that? It was at the Senior Center in Colorado Springs. And it was a small show, and we all brought our roses in. And Matt's stepfather and mother were our judges. They came down from Denver, Dr. Campbell and Linda Campbell, and judged that first rose show. And I learned a great deal from them, and at the different things that people were growing. I mean, I thought I was just really doing well, and at that point, I think I maybe had 50 roses out here. But I learned about the culture that the things others were doing, things I could have done better to grow what I did show. People came and learned that they could grow roses here in Colorado Springs. They never had thought about it, but other people were doing it, so why couldn't they do it? So a rose show is educational. And I thought, well, all right, maybe we should just keep doing this a little and branch out and see what's happening, say, in Denver. So Denver had been having shows for a long time, and 70 years, I think, at that point. And we went up and entered a rose show in Denver. And would you believe, we actually brought home some blue ribbons.
Oh.
Well, there's nothing like a blue ribbon to hook you.
There's a gateway right there.
Right, it is. There's nothing.
We think
like
we don't care until we get it. We think, it doesn't matter. And then,
you mean that my John Davis was better than all the rest of them?
It's very personal.
It's kind of an interesting thing. So then we went a little further afield. There were at the time several rose societies on the Front Range that were within reach of us, and we just decided to exhibit. And the more we exhibited, the more we learned. I think probably Jerry and I are both judges today because, we learned a lot. And at some point you decide, okay, we've won all this stuff. Maybe it's time that we educated others. And never to reach that point is, in a rose education, is really something, where you think, okay, I think I can do this. I think I know what I'm looking at. I think I know how to get it to the show. I think I know how to show it. I think I can interest other people in growing it. This is sort of a maturation, a coming of age, I guess, in your rose education.
Mm-hmm.
So we became judges, and we still exhibit quite a bit. Although when I say quite a bit, it means, well, we have 3 rose shows that we habitually enter. And the third one is in Utah, and that takes a trip of about 10 hours, and we're getting older. So it's a pity, but there are fewer rose shows. But, there are still people who appreciate the beauty and grow roses as a hobby. And as long as there is an outlet for that, I think it's a good thing. So I hope rose shows continue, and we'll see what happens as our pandemic society winds down and people go out again. So hopefully we'll have more shows. I got my fingers crossed.
I do too. I'm hearing more and more buzz about rose shows, and we have new things. We're developing new classes for roses that aren't sprayed. We're doing virtual shows. We're doing a lot of photography classes, so your rose doesn't have to be perfect the day you show it, but the day you take the picture. So that's opened lots of doors. And the camaraderie around putting together a rose show, and just what you learn from each other, and just the inspiration you get from each other makes it such a worthy. And then open it to the public so they can come and enjoy and enjoy, and maybe join the fun too. So, but just having roses available for people to see. And again, you're talking regionally. It's like, okay, I saw something on the internet. However, this I could grow here because you did.
Right.
So I just love that part of it. I'm not a big time exhibitor, but I do love to take pictures. And I'm looking into the virtual rose show element. I think that could be, a lot of fun, regardless of if we get to travel in the near future or not. So we want to have, great options regardless. So I'm looking forward to what the future holds for rose shows.
Good. That makes 2 of us.
Yeah, great. So you've grown a lot of roses. You've grown them for a long time. So I'm sure we have listeners that are just getting started. So what advice would you give to them?
Well, I would tell them right off the bat that if they're going to spend money on roses, they ought to spend a little bit of money and join the American Rose Society, because it's going to save them a lot of trouble. If I had the handbook in the early years when I was buying roses and selecting roses, I wouldn't have made all the mistakes that I did. You can open the handbook and check the name of the rose and see what other people think about it. That's a big deal. I mean, you not only have Joe next door at your shoulder helping you buy a rose, you've got the American Rose Society membership in a handbook telling you this rose is not worth growing, or this one is a super rose. This is the one you want. It's just an amazing tool. I recommend it to everybody. And I also think that being in touch with people who are growing roses in a local rose society, that's big too, because it'll save you from making a lot of mistakes, give you a lot of good advice on how to handle your climate and your location. It's just a real no-brainer to me.
It's so wonderful to be in the company of people who love what you love, of course. And, whether you just want a few roses to put on your dinner table, or to add to a bouquet, or just to enjoy from your window. I mean, roses are just beautiful, and they're attached to so much wonderful history. And many people had someone in their life that grew a rose. But your membership to the American Rose Society also gives you the American Rose magazine, which is bi-monthly and chock full of growing advice and tips and beautiful rose gardens in other areas. So you just there's just so much to learn and to be a part of just by that simple membership. So I totally agree, and so much for the local society. I have learned so much. I had grown roses for a long time before I joined our local society. And, I thought, I know how to grow roses. I don't need to grow for that. But I wanted to be around people who liked what I liked. But I can tell you, I have learned more than I didn't know what I didn't know. I have learned so much from them. And we have people who grow 10 roses. We have people who grow, 400, 500 roses in our society. And so they've been through it all, and you just get to see and be a part of it. So like you, I'm a big advocate for the American Rose Society and definitely for your local societies.
Well, good. I hope that there will be more of them in the future. I think we have turned a corner as far as membership is concerned. And I think the more enthusiastic our board and membership is, the more it'll appeal to more people. Mm-hmm. I also think it's a big step in the right direction that we are getting so many roses that do not require pampering. Mm-hmm. Just the whole trend toward landscape roses that are carefree, easy to grow. That is a biggie. That's a great, huge, giant step in the right direction. And so in that regard, I think comparing some of the landscape roses that are coming out today in programs with some of the old garden roses and saying, well, if you like this rose, X rose, mm-hmm. take a look at this old garden rose, and what it can do for you. I think one of the biggest problems with particularly the hardiest old garden roses is their size. Mm-hmm. Gardens are getting smaller. I mean, home gardens are getting quite small compared to what the suburbs used to give us years ago. And so some of these old garden roses can get fairly big. And so when you're trying to help other people choose roses, you have to sort of say, well, what landscape are we dealing with? How much room do you have? What do you want out of a rose? Do you want it to cover your fence? Do you want to display in the middle of your backyard? Does it need to bloom all summer? These are pretty basic questions. And this is one of the reasons why I think fewer people are actually growing the large old garden roses, is because they don't have the room. It's a pity, but there you are. It's another trend in our society, and we just have to make sure that at least for the people who want them, and this is what Matt is doing, that those roses don't go away, because it's so easy to lose a rose. It's just incredibly easy.
It is.
We saw with the last economic downturn how many rose growers went out of business. All of a sudden, where are we going to find these things? And I will say another problem with own root roses, which is what Matt sells, and of course other nurseries do too, is that we have a society that wants to be instantly gratified. Well, if you buy an own root rose, you're in for 3 to 5 years of growing that rose to maturity. And it's something that is a hard sell, it really is. So we need to look at education also, along with selling own root rose. I try to do this. I write occasionally columns for the Denver Rose Window. And in this, I try to tell people, it takes a little longer to grow on an own root rose to the point where it's mature. But then you're not going to lose it. When the temperature drops 70 degrees, it's going to be there because its roots are in your ground and it's not grafted onto something else. So it's education, and that's what the Rose Society does best, and what our local rose societies do. And it's a process. We'll just have to see how it turns out.
Well, there really is a rose for every garden, regardless of size. You can make a statement with a big rose, but you can also have an incredible pleasure with a miniature rose, or I grow several full-size roses in pots on my deck, kind of my overflow from the garden, or hasn't got to the garden yet, or we have to make room because, after you've been in a place for 35 years, there's an overcrowding problem. But many, many roses, even large roses, can be grown in containers. So that is another option for people with smaller spaces.
Right.
They do very well, and many give you season-long bloom, which is, what most people want. But I've always wanted old garden roses. I'm a history buff, and I've always wanted old garden roses in my garden. And the way that I have looked at them is that they don't bloom all summer, but after the dark, cold Indiana winters, they give me fireworks and they give me fragrance in the spring. So I'm ready to jump out of my skin. I'm so excited about spring when it comes. And so are these roses. And so you just get this explosion of color. The fireworks and the fragrance in your garden. It's such a whoa, hello world, spring and early summer. And to me, it's worth it.
Right, it is. And they're wonderful. There's nothing like an old garden rose for scent and for actually the amount of bloom. And this is one thing that I always tell people, well, lilacs only bloom once also. This is, if you want this in your garden, appreciate the whole 6 weeks of blooms it's going to give you and the amount of bloom. There's nothing like an old garden rose for amount of bloom. It's just, they're wonderful that way.
It's just an incredible thing. Well, Carol, our time is coming to a close, but I think we could probably talk all day. But thanks so much for joining me. It's just been inspiring.
Oh, thank you. It's been a good conversation, and like every other conversation I have about roses, I have learned some things too. So that's a good deal.
Well, I feel honored. So that is a good deal. Thank you so much. And just thank you so much for your willingness to show Matt, what we can do with the roses that you have in your garden and make sure that they're still available. So thanks for working on that project with Matt. He's excited to see where this is all going to go. And we want these roses to be available. And we love our new roses, but we don't want to forget the roses that have been beautiful in our world for so long.
Right. We absolutely do not want to do that. They are a very important part of our rose culture and our rose history. And we don't want to lose that.
Oh, we certainly do not. Friends, we're so glad that you're here, and we hope this program has inspired you too and given you more roses for your wish list. We'll have pictures of Carol's garden on our show page at rosechatpodcast.com. And if you're on Facebook, you can follow Carol there too. Well, until next time, happy gardening from your friends at Rose Chat.
You've been listening to the Rose Chat podcast with Chris VanCleave and Teresa Byington, expert rose gardeners who want to help you achieve the rose garden of your dreams. Don't miss an episode. Listen anytime on our website at rosechatpodcast.com or listen on the go via the Rose Chat app on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Share this podcast with your social networks and join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by using the hashtag RoseChat. Join us next time for another edition of the Rose Chat podcast. The Rose Chat podcast is a production of the Rose Chat Media Group, Birmingham, Alabama.